What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Blerded Out. The One Piece is on break this week, so it's going to be a bit of a shorter episode, but I still have a few things I want to discuss. First off, there was a really cool concept about the last One Piece chapter, chapter 1127, that I want to talk about. And it kind of explains a bit of my confusion, or at least the idea of it will explain my confusion. So we're going to talk about that. And then JJK dropped their last chapter, so we're going to talk about that and probably JJK as a whole a bit as well. As always, a word from our sponsors. Thank you for tuning in to Blerded Out. Whether you're listening from YouTube on my channels like Darren King Kumo or Blerd Out Podcast, or one of the many podcast sites like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and more, I appreciate your support. If you want to listen to older episodes of the podcast, head on over to Patreon. If you join as a free member, you can watch all the old episodes from the old seasons for free. Plus, there'll be other content that didn't quite make it to an episode or on a YouTube video that you can check out there as well. Your support means the world.
Welcome to the podcast, call it Blerd It Out, with your host, Tyrant. What's Kuma talking about? Talking all things, we chillin' like Okiji. Better activate your Byakugan so you can see me. Coming at you left, right, up, down, sideways. Reactions, reviews, maybe even let's plays. On his droid boy, trying to make you laugh, make you smile. We about to set sail, so sit back and stay a while. It's Blerd It Out. Blerd It Out.
And if you have not caught up to the latest chapters and episodes, please note there will be spoilers ahead.
Spoilers.
Okay, so One Piece first. The Viz dropped the official translations, and it changed up one of the things that really convinced me that everything that we kind of got last chapter was part of a hallucination. And the theory and concept are pretty simple. Basically, they were turned up off that green fairy that the giants were giving them, because Nami was seeing so many different things in so many different panels. And at some point, even like in my review, I was talking about how Nami originally had a sword on her back, and the sword would go, it would disappear at random intervals. And another thing that really caught my attention was that Luffy had weapons on his back. At some point it was a sword, then it changed to an axe, then I think it changed to not being there at all. And after looking around a little bit, checking out some other reactions of things, it seemed like everybody noticed different parts of things being weird. Some people noticed like Usopp's bag being there one moment, not being there the next. There were some comments about Luffy's hat, but Luffy's hat tends to be an anomalous thing. Sometimes it's hidden but still there. Sometimes he tucks it in somewhere. So that one wasn't as convincing. But what really sold the idea was that in the Viz translation, Luffy says that he doesn't want to eat anymore. Basically, because they talked about roasting the rabbit first, and then they have this cat. And Luffy says, I'll pass on eating the cat, I had enough of the rabbit. Now we know Luffy, and we know he has an endless appetite. So not only would he never pass up food, he's not going to pass up new food, especially if it's going to be cooked by Sanji. We have seen him eat himself into a coma pretty much. So this is not Luffy behavior. The discussion though comes from whether it's all an illusion and these characters are there but just hallucinating and like having visions and just acting strange, or if it's Nami hallucinating and interacting with people that are not the crew. So like, is this Nami here and maybe Luffy's like Loki and the other crew are just other giants? I think that's less likely just because she sees them as her size. I think even if she was hallucinating, it wouldn't make sense for her to hallucinate a giant being like Luffy's size. I feel like that would be a stretch. No pun intended. I think it would make more sense if Nami was still like unconscious. The only thing with that is there are segments of the chapter where there are clearly giants not interacting with the Straw Hats. Like they see the forest burning from afar where there are no Straw Hats at, and they're trying to react to that, talking about Yggdrasil. So it's like, if it is a hallucination, how is it that we readers are still seeing some things not from Nami's perspective, not from any of the crew's perspective? Like, it almost feels as if we're the ones in the hallucination. Like, we had the green fairy, so now the entire chapter is just a hallucination to us. I think it makes the most sense to say that some of the aspects that we are seeing are real. I would say the crew are part of the hallucination. Maybe the big animals are part of the hallucination. But as far as like the location, it seems like the location, like the Lego-esque look of the entire place, that seems legitimate just because that's how it looks outside of the crew's perspective. When we see the giants, they are in a Lego area. And there's a difference between like the Lego area and like Yggdrasil. Yggdrasil is not a Lego tree, it's a normal tree, but there are like Lego trees around it. And I just thought that was fascinating. Like it was a concept I hadn't thought of. I was just seeing those because I thought there were errors essentially. I was just like, man, there's a lot of errors in this chapter. And it still could possibly be errors. I think the idea of hallucination or some kind of trick makes a lot more sense to me. Because even when Oda makes mistakes, he doesn't make this many at once. And they have editors to like mitigate the amount of mistakes that can come through at one time. So I doubt like these, because these are like minor consistency mistakes where it's like, there's an object there, now it's not there, now it's there, now it's not there. And unless like all the editors were on break and Oda was like rushing the chapter, I don't see them making that many mistakes, at least at one time. But that's a cool theory, thought I'd share it. The other thing we're going to talk about today is JJK. JJK released their final chapter, and I thought it was mid. Honestly, the entire ending of JJK is just a disappointment to me. And it's not like it's been like the last 5 or 6 chapters that were a disappointment. It's been the series basically since we lost Gojo. After that, I think the series just went downhill because it was a lot of the same thing over and over and over and over again. Like, I couldn't tell you the amount of times Yuji ended like a chapter with the Black Flash, and then like the next chapter, we just act like nothing happened. Like it's dialogue, it's fight, and then the chapter ends again with Black Flash. It's like, okay, we're getting into a rhythm of just throwing hands to throw hands. Every couple of chapters, somebody dies. It's not Yuji somehow. It's just everyone around him. And it's just like, all right, this is not enjoyable. And I mean, I don't think it's that crazy of a concept. I definitely called Nobara coming back. And she came back in such an unsplendid fashion. Just such a boring way to come back and like instantly change the trajectory of the fight and make it somehow worse than it already was. And now she's a character again. It's just that was one of the things I think way back when I was talking about the second season of JJK, like after I first watched it, I said that Nobara dying would be fantastic if it stuck. If it stuck. I was really positive it was not going to stick. And I mean, they left a really, really tiny sparkle of hint that it wasn't going to stick. Because he was like, I have this ability that, you know, can somewhat save people, but there's like a 1 in a million chance it'll work. And I was like, okay, so that chance is going to work. That's just how that is. Otherwise, there's no point in doing it. And then they like purposely kept Nobara's condition a secret. They never talked about it. This, that, and the other. So the steps were there for her to come back. I just wish it didn't happen. Like everyone around Yuji got underutilized. I think Maki was super underutilized. she would do things and then disappear for large swaths of story. It's like, all right, well, I guess you guys just thought she had her time when you were just like, all right, this isn't the Maki show, so let's put her back in her box. Even Toto came back for a little bit after being put in a box and was still like obviously Yuji is the main character. Obviously the show is going to circle around him and essentially Sukuna. Yuji's not interesting. He is not a super fun main character. He is very generic. He has no outstanding qualities that make him like very deep or personal. And honestly, I don't like any of the main trio. I think they're all kind of boring. I would say Megumi is the least boring, but he's still boring. And the fact that those three are the ones that kind of, they make it out of this the most unscathed is like, it's plot armor, sure, but it makes it so uninteresting for the rest of the story. Like this last chapter, where it's basically just those three doing like hunting curses, is boring. Like you just fought the strongest sorcerer in the world, and now you're just hunting dudes on the street. Street level criminals. That's where we're at now. And so far there's been no announcement of a part 2. And I've seen some people saying that if there was a part 2, it would make part 1 better. And I don't understand that concept, because part 1's ending is not bad because there isn't a part 2. Part 1's ending is bad because it's bad. It's just not well written. The entire Yuta and Gojo's body for like a chapter and a half. It just seems like they kept throwing things at Sukuna, and then eventually, for some reason, Nobara stuck. That was the one that was like, all right, well, Sukuna's done now. It was so quick. We had chapters and chapters and chapters. Like what? How long has this fight been going? 50 something chapters, maybe? They've been fighting Sukuna for so long, and they're just like, all right, he's done. It's over. Like, it didn't even feel like a gradual fall in Sukuna's abilities. It was just like, he was out here dealing damage, taking out the strongest, and then all of a sudden, it's just over. And the idea of Yuji essentially being at, or will be at, Sukuna's level makes no sense to me. I understand like the whole lineage, and one of my least favorite tropes is the younger generation surpassing the older generation. I think that's so unnecessary. I think you can still have existing generations where, yeah, the old ones were really strong, and the young ones don't necessarily need to be strong. They can be different, which I think it's one of the things that I kind of like about what Gojo said at the end here, where it's like, you don't have to be me. You don't have to follow in my footsteps. You can be strong on your own in different ways. I like that ideology. It feels weird here because that's not what they're aiming at. They're clearly aiming for Yuji to be stronger than Gojo and Sukuna. Like, or at least that's the leftover hint that Yuji's potential reaches those bounds. And I feel like that's just, there's no reason to believe that, other than the story telling you that's how it's going to happen. And it's like Sukuna still has a finger here, and he's talking about if he gets a chance again, he's going to be different. It feels like closure for the sake of closure. It's like, all right, the story's ended. We have to close these story points just because the story's over. Like at this point, it would have been better if you left it open. Reformed Sukuna is not interesting. A spirit who is basically, that's like if Madara came back and was like, you know what, I'm good now. I learned from my past mistakes. And they kind of wanted to do that at the end of Naruto, but I don't think they really got to that level. Even though Naruto's ending was also kind of trash. But and I think it's a bit two-sided. Because he says he'll do things differently. I don't necessarily think that means he'd be like a saint. I just think it means he's not going to come out and just be like, all right, everyone dies. It's very disappointing because I think JJK had really strong potential. But the thing I've said about JJK before is that it relies heavily on fights and choreography, which it does really well. Like, I'm not gonna discount JJK for that. They do fights like no one else does. They're so detailed, and the choreography is amazing. The curse techniques, the way they have to work, so intricate, complex, and like it builds a strong fight. But when you lose interest in a fight, there's nothing to fall back on. There's no story outside of the fight that's currently happening. So for Sukuna's fight, once it got boring like 25 chapters in, there was nothing for us to fall back on. There was no other plot, and there's no like side characters that are doing their own thing. There's no history. There's nothing there. It's just the Sukuna fight. And if you're not interested in the Sukuna fight, you're not interested in the series at this point in time, because there's nothing else. And that's what got me, because it's like there's nothing else here. Once Sukuna beat Gojo, and it was just a repetitive case of different characters slamming their curse techniques against Sukuna to see what would do anything. I was like, okay, well, we're losing the complexity of the fights. It's just becoming everyone's trying their best skills, trying to whittle down Sukuna. And what sucks about that is like you know Yuji's gonna win in the end. And this isn't as much as a hit on Yuji, but it's like when you kind of write yourself in this area, you have to be able to make it interesting. Whereas, okay, Yuji is probably gonna win this fight just because of how the story's been going. Just because of the fact that Gojo's out, and Gojo was the strongest person in the series outside of apparently Sukuna. So it's like, at this point, it's gonna be kind of a, I'm not gonna say it's a Mickey Mouse. It's a very expected ending. You took out the strongest, so you leave the suspected prodigies to fill their place. Yuta is a side character. He was never gonna win. Maki's a side character. She was never gonna win. It was always gonna be Yuji. It was always gonna be the trio, essentially, because I mean, you can technically count Megumi and Nobara in that, but it's always gonna be those three that win. For me, I don't think there was a way that they would win that would be interesting, because you're telling me that you beat the strongest sorcerer of this age, the guy who could wipe out all of Japan by himself, but you can't beat 3 kids in high school. You can't, one of them you already have beaten pretty much. Megumi is basically in the fetal position against the corner. All you really had to do is beat Yuji. And you just couldn't do that. You beat Gojo, but you couldn't beat Yuji. You couldn't take out Maki. Like, what? Realistically, and you beat Yuta, who I think arguably is the second strongest sorcerer of the time. You beat those two technically. Even though, you know, Yuta came back with some Rika nonsense. But like, you beat these two. You can't beat Yuji. How does that make sense? Even if Yuji's like got the special lineage, even if he's adapted to Sukuna's like curse techniques, all this, that, and the other, you still can't beat him? You're supposed to be the strongest sorcerer in existence, and you can't beat Yuji, who has not reached your level, who has not reached Gojo's level, who has not reached Yuta's level. And he makes it out? Okay. No, okay. All that to say, I'm sorely disappointed in the ending. I feel like there was a lot of potential. I feel like it was all wasted. You know, there were some redeeming qualities about the My Hero ending that I was okay with. I don't think there's anything about the JJK ending that I'm like, all right, this is cool. This was of all the dirt that piled up, this was like the diamond in the rough. Nah, it was just boring. Like to the point where I don't even want to watch when they animate this stuff. I'm gonna watch Gojo versus Sukuna, and I don't even know if I'm watching the rest of that. Like, it's so unnecessary. You could have just ended the series at Sukuna versus Gojo. The rest of that didn't even happen. But like I said, short episode today. Just a few discussions to whet the appetite for the break. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. Smash that like button. I will catch y'all in the next one.